Chatting today with Guy Ailion, co-founder and CEO of Mattoboard. Hi, Guy. How's it going?
Hey, Scottie. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm excited to chat with you about Mattoboard. So before we dive into your software, let's I'd love to learn a little bit more about your past and sort of what maybe brought you here. What brought you to Mattoboard?
Thanks, Scottie. I've worked in the interior design and architecture industry for a little over 15 years. And I started actually doing private residential homes and boutique island hotels in sort of remote locations around the world. I now partner an award-winning architecture firm that's based in London. It's about 40 architects and interior designers. And there we've mostly specialized in ultra high net worth individual private homes. So luxury residential homes with, construction values of, anything from 5 to 100 million dollar amounts, depending on the scale of the buildings. We've also done multi-residential products. A lot of knowledge in the space in interior design too. And I think what we began to realize was that anyone under the age of 35 in my office wasn't really going to the material sample library to start their journey. And these days, everyone starts online looking for inspiration. And everything about our digital workflow is done with software now. We CAD in software, and we build models in BIM software, and we even sketch today digitally. And it was no wonder that everyone was sort of gravitating towards building digital samples, digital sample boards and mood boards for their projects. And then I think when COVID hit, this was where really everyone in the office couldn't go to the sample library to start this sort of mixing and matching process. And so this was really the first time we realized that we needed to find digital solutions. And we would do them. We would hack them together using different, 2D software. And sometimes we even put 3D sample boards together using 3D artists. There were two major outcomes of that. I think the first was that we were hungry from a cultural or behavioral position to change the way that we did mood boarding and sampling. And that's why we were doing these, finding different ways to do this online. But the other more interesting outcome of all of that was our clients were happy to receive digital sample boards. And that was really interesting because that was probably the one thing we didn't think that they would. And they were so comfortable with seeing digital boards and making comments and making changes and us going through this iterative process digitally before we actually had to order the physical sample board. And I think that was really the eureka moment for what would eventually become Mattoboard.
Yeah, so you were kind of observing how your coworkers were behaving when it came to materials and putting together boards, and they were already not gravitating towards those physical samples. And so you thought, this could be like maybe a more efficient way even to do this. Did you find that it was quicker in some ways?
Well, actually, it was quite slow, and that's because the tools were suited for that task. So, if you think about material curation, if you call it that, it's extremely hand-eye coordinated. You're grabbing something and you're putting it next to something else, and you're looking across, your sample library. You grab something else, you put a few onto the side, and there's this mixing and matching process that interior designers do, where they're constantly making little micro decisions on a pattern of something, whether this hue of orange matches this pebbles orange, which matches a vein in a marble, for example. These are like micro decisions that are happening all the time, that happen on a color level, a texture level, a lighting level. So we do this hand to hand, and it's actually a part of the process designers love. And it's extremely iterative and it's fast. Online, if you do it anyway, sort of using Canva or Photoshop or 3D software, it's extremely async with the way that we're trying to design. We now have to make the decision. I want an oak floor. Go and find an oak floor, download this image of an oak floor, bring it into our software, add a drop shadow, bring in this carpet that we want next to it. And then if we, for whatever reason, want to swap that oak floor for a herringbone pattern oak floor, we now have to go and find another one, download the image, bring it back in, scale it up, hope it's the right resolution, hope it's shot in the right color. And the reality is that they're not. They're all shot in different color. And so we're tweaking the colors of these materials to try and make them look right, but that's not really fair because it feels like we're cheating. And so this whole process is async. And yes, it builds like a very beautiful board, but it's slow. It's not actually fulfilling that creative act of this mixing and matching, this extremely fast-paced way that designers think. And so, yes, we were doing it. And so we recognized there was this behavioral need to do it digitally. But the processes, the software out there is completely async with the way designers actually design. So we sought after making Mattoboard as a way of thinking about, one, the digital solution, but two, one that actually matches our real life behavior. I guess as we talk about it, you'll realize that, and you know this, 3D is going to be a big part of that life, because 3D will allow us to make these changes in seconds. It allows us to see texture and detail and shadow and light. We can talk more about that, of course.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can imagine that when you're trying to create a board online without, maybe using something like Mattoboard, you're having to also be creative in your mind as to what you want to pull next, rather than having an array of samples in front of you where you can get inspiration from each sample that you see and go, oh, this would look great with this, and oh, this is what I need next. And that, like you were saying, that process seems like it would be very painful.
Yeah, we as designers, we almost rely on the happy accidents of surrounding ourselves with materials, shiny objects, and products, because that's really part of the creative act. It's not necessarily a linear path that we take. And as soon as you have to say, I know I want this, go and find it, bring it in, and then say, well, then I need to have this material and this product. And it's not how designers think. That's us going out and fetching exactly what we want and bringing it to this board. That works if you're copying something, right? Because that's like a guide for you. You're like, okay, I'm just going to copy that and go find something. But the reality is, like, we go through this haphazard process where we think, all right, I'm looking for a Scandinavian, slightly mid-century, but also vintage look. Okay, so we don't have a single point of inspiration for that. So now we start this process. And we just really want to be able to surround ourselves with a plethora of color, texture, material, options, things we've thought about, things we haven't thought about. So this was like this world we wanted to create with Mattoboard. This world of actually feeling like you're in your material sample library, but everything is on display for you. You can narrow your focus when you want to. You can be like, I'm just looking for concrete textures. And then you just surround yourself with concrete textures. And now you can play. Or you want Mattoboard to just be showing you materials every time you load it up, which is something we do. Every time you load Mattoboard, you'll see something else, just to inspire that sort of happy accident process. So we set about to try and make a tool for that exact behavior.
Okay. So I guess it would be good to define what Mattoboard is at this moment. Exactly.
Right. So in its simplest description, Mattoboard is an online design tool where designers can access a library of virtual samples and virtual materials, which is hardware and finishes. So anything like wood, terrazzos, marbles, stones, granites, taps, door handles, etc., and bring these into a 3D material board. So it's like a virtual tabletop where you can mix and match materials in this setting, this virtual setting. So this is what we call virtual sampling, which allows you to actually look at products and move them around with real-time light and shadow, and examine a door handle and put it down on the board, and then bring in a carpet and see the way light moves over the carpet while it's sitting next to a 3D handle, and see how the handle reacts in the same time to light and shadow. So we've essentially digitized sample table in a designer's studio, put it all online.
Where are the samples in Mattoboard? Where do they come from? Are those samples you all created, or are you partnering with suppliers?
We have brand partners. These are brands or manufacturers of products, like we described. they host their materials and their products on Mattoboard in this virtual library. We create the 3D asset for them, and then they get hosted onto our library. And that library is accessible to any designer on Mattoboard. It's like one global material and hardware library. And then the designers themselves can upload their own materials and products, and we convert those into 3D for them. And this can become their own resource. Sometimes designers have their own materials and products that maybe Mattoboard hasn't partnered with yet. Designers can also suggest brand partners, and we'll go out to them and explain to them what virtual sampling is, and or designers can actually upload their own. Because it's very possible that, you know, designer walks into someone's house and the project has a carpet in situ that they really love. And of course, that's not going to exist on Mattoboard. So we have the ability for the designer to take a picture of a sample of that carpet or the in situ materials. We'll convert that into 3D automatically, and that will exist in their library, and they can bring that straight into our 3D board and use that as a reference.
When they upload the image, is it pretty instantaneous, or is that something that takes a little bit of time and then it will show up in their library?
It's now instantaneous. It's a matter of seconds. It used to be up to 24 hours for us to do that, but we've improved the software a lot. We've got really a great group of sort of founding professionals who work on Mattoboard. Anyone who's actually on our pro tier becomes part of like a private Slack channel. And this is where we're engaging with ideas on what to build next. So we're constantly iterating. So we've gone from 24 hours to create a 3D material to now, like, it's a matter of seconds. You upload the material and there it is.
That's amazing. I was going to say 24 hours is pretty good.
Yeah,
But instantaneous.
It was.
So once they upload that material and it's available to them, is it then available to all your users, or is it specifically, only available in that account?
It's specifically to that person's account. We are working on the ability to share parts of your library with the whole of Mattoboard. If you've uploaded a particular brand, it's of a high enough quality that it's worth sharing. So that eventually will happen, where any designer who's creating a library that is a net positive value to every other designer on Mattoboard will look to grow the library that way. But at the moment, it's just personal.
I'd like to go back a little bit to you were talking about how you can bring in, the light. So you view samples in different lights. Maybe you could explain that piece a little bit more, because we know samples all look different, right? And different lights, and depending on where you're putting them.
So this is something that we have coined as a V sample, which is really just short for virtual sample. And what a V sample does is it is a 3-dimensional digital twin of the real product. So if we think about it as a marble sample, the limitations obviously in real life when you order a sample are that the manufacturer has to sort of send you a very small little piece. It's maybe about this big. Very difficult for you to explain to the client the entire sort of patina of the grain or vein in that piece of marble. And when it gets put into your board, the marble might be the main feature of your board, as in like it's the main countertop in a kitchen. But when you've put your board together of physical samples, real samples, your marble might be this big. And so proportionately, it doesn't tell the right story for you. You're trying to show that marble's a major player in this design, and actually you've got this tiny little sample and you're asking your client to just imagine it. You've taken those limitations of the physical sample, and with its digital twin, with the V sample, we can now take on the properties of that material. So the way that light hits it, the way it casts shadow, whether it has a graininess or a roughness to it. And we can put all of that into a 3-dimensional environment where you can now take a light in Mattoboard in real time. So, just glancing your finger across your iPad or your mouse on the desktop, and you can move light over your board. And as you do that, all of those V samples will react with the light as they would in real life. So a honed piece of marble will react very, very differently to bouncing light than a polished marble finish, which will have a very high spot. And Matterboard is one lighting environment, which means that all the materials that you bring in are all sharing the same lighting environment. And now you don't have that problem of downloading this oak floor with this metal trim and this marble. And every picture you've downloaded of different manufacturers' websites are all shot under different lighting conditions, some better than others and some shittier resolutions than others. Now everything is sharing the same environment. So you know that if it matches in Matterboard, it will match in real life. And now just talking about that constraint about that little marble sample. Well, once we've created a V sample, we now have the ability to, if you want that little marble sample to be more present on your board, be a huge surface, well, now you can just scale it up. And we'll be able to take that texture of that marble with all its vein and patina and character and texture and just make it much bigger on your board. So you can actually start to build the right story for curating these beautiful boards. Those are some of the advantages of V samples and using light and shadow in Matterboard.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I would imagine that makes it a lot easier for the client to understand exactly how those are going to, translate into their own space. So I would imagine that's super helpful.
You can also share, or talking about the client, this experience of designing in 3D is not limited to, the benefit of it is not limited to the designer using Matterboard. The designer now has the ability to share this board as a non-editable board, but as a 3D scene with their clients. So they can open it on a web browser, can open on their own iPads, they can open on their phone. And when they do, they'll see the 3D board, all the pieces of samples in 3D that you've put together. And as they open it, the light moves across it. And so they instantly get a sense of what their board looks like and their materials. And they can even control the light. And they can leave comments and ask you to change things and say, okay, well, I don't like that terrazzo. I'd rather a composite or something darker. And then you can just go to your board, find that sample and swap the material out for something that's more appropriate and refresh this link. And all they have to do is then open that link again. And then they've got that 3-dimensional board with light. They can examine it, they can zoom in. So it's just something that's never been possible before for designers. We've always been limited to these physical sample trays. Our clients are more remote than ever. The world's gone remote. It's part of our mission is we really want to be able to emancipate the designer's workflow in a way that's never been done before. We always feel like interior designers and their software has always been lagging, and it's just not fair. We're in a creative industry, just a massive talent, and everything around us is going digital. And we really want there to be no limits to what the designer can do digitally. And so Matterboard allows you to do these things very quickly, interact with clients extremely quickly. It's pretty exciting.
And once they have created the board and the client has approved everything and they like what they see, can they then order actual samples of those materials? How does that process work?
So I think at this stage in our life, most of the designers are using it for their initial concept boards. And then they're going out once there's an approval and contacting the brands and manufacturers. And so they can now contact the brands who have partnered with us directly through Matterboard for them to order samples from them. So, here's use this product in Matterboard. We have a contact us page for that brand. They can link them directly. And we are now also exploring sample fulfillment partnerships with some companies that do fulfillment for a lot of brands. And they've basically approached us and have asked us to be our fulfillment partner. So we're exploring that. It's probably the next phase of our life, is that you'll be able to order samples from the boards, depending on whether they're available by these fulfillment partners.
That would be amazing. I can only imagine how easy that will make things for designers. And that also makes me think of the amount of waste that your product is helping to cut down on. So what have you learned? I'm sure going through this whole process, you've learned a lot about how much samples impact the environment and how much waste there is and how much manufacturers spend on creating samples and shipping them across back and forth. So maybe tell me a little bit about that.
So this is really at like one of the core pillars behind our business, one of the values that we are aiming for, and that is to create a more sustainable future for the A&D industry. And that really begins also at sampling. The sampling industry, as all the designers know, while we love to touch and feel samples, it's extremely wasteful. I mean, we're talking about manufacturers just putting a little piece of fabric into a box with bubble wrap and shipping it out. And for manufacturers, not only is it a complete waste on a lot of their inventory and therefore unsustainable, but it's extremely expensive. So for them to send, a tap from Hansgrohe, for example, to an interior designer, that's an expensive piece of equipment to put onto a sample board. And they can't send that to everybody. So they really have to limit who they send it to. And so there's this gateway to a lot of designers getting access to a lot of products and materials. And of course, with a V sample, this sort of digital twin, these manufacturers can now showcase this product for the designer to actually examine and a client to spin around and examine next to the carpet sample and the wood sample and the door handles, all in the same lighting environment. So they can now showcase their products to hundreds and thousands of designers in this virtual mood board and virtual sample table, rather than the few thousand they can send it to. We're now aiming to only send physical samples once you've reached confidence or consensus in your virtual sample board. And the reality is that the designers are making all those iterative multi-second decisions at this concept level. This is where you are mixing and matching, and you're really trying dozens of different materials. You've got this leather, and the leather might have a pressed pattern in it. It might have a fine grain. It might have a big grain. It might be textured. It might be mottled. You don't want to order 15 different red samples to do that. You just want to quickly be able to change that digitally, get close to what you want, and then order the physical sample when your client's generally happy. So that's our goal. Our goal is to actually lower the amount of physical samples that are ordered and that are shipped and thrown into bins. And at the same time, for the manufacturers, this is something that we call return on sampling investment. For the manufacturers, if you just increase the speed at which you can send samples, if you go from being able to send samples in 3 days to being 24 hours, all you really do is allow the designer to, or incentivize the designer to frivolously order samples, right? Because they're just going to get a box 24 hours later. What you'll end up seeing is that more samples are actually being sent. So that's more shipping and that's more cost. And there's actually a lower return on sampling investment for the brands, because now designers are ordering samples where they really know that there's no conviction in whether they're going to use it. They just want 15 different red samples next to each other. And so the return on sampling investment goes down. But if you digitize this industry and you allow designers to take those 15 and make those changes, they may land up ordering only 2 red leather samples because they've got a much higher conviction that's what they want. And so the return on sampling investment goes up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've spent some time playing around on Mattoboard, and I mean, the sampling is so realistic that I would imagine that there's even cases where designers don't even need a sample because it's so good. The 3D the image is so realistic that what's the point? We're good.
One of our designers, who is based in New York, and she does luxury residential and hospitality. And she was saying, for her residential projects and her commercial projects, she's getting approvals just from showing them Mattoboards. And this means that she's not even ordering the physical sample, especially when she's seen one before, when she knows the product, or she's ordering a physical sample for only the ones that she wants to see in real life. Otherwise, her clients are just happily signing them off as digital samples, so long as the designer has confidence and the materials look realistic. So it's pretty exciting to hear that, because we can start to see sort of a reshaping of the industry. And we've even in those instances had the designers say to their manufacturers, do you have a virtual sample to send me? And if they don't, then they're saying, well, you should talk to Mattoboard, or the designers converting it themselves. So really it is a reshaping. I think it's still early days, but it's going to completely change for the next 12 months in an exciting way.
It seems like a huge opportunity for manufacturers, a huge savings for them in so many areas. I wonder if there'll be a time where V sample is sort of like Kleenex. Like, do you have a V sample I can use?
Well, that's what we would really hope for. It's not just about establishing that, that nomenclature in the industry. It's actually about establishing a new behavior. We want designers to be able to simply say, don't send me that, send me the V sample, let me look at it first. Let me examine that, let me show that to the client, let me see if it works with all my other V samples that I've got in my board. And then, if I really need to, I'll want to see the physical sample. So maybe things like the tap, for example. You'll order the tap if you've never seen one before, and then get it physically after you've approved it as a V sample. And that, you just have higher conviction. You're at the final mile of making a sign off with your client. You've really built all their confidence without having to send them physical samples all the time or take pictures of them and show them to them and without all the other materials. So we generally hope that it'll become a part of the designer's workflow. And I guess the other thing about it is it's really a benefit to the whole industry because it's got so much value add to the suppliers. There's so much value for them being able to showcase their products virtually rather than always physically, and the waste and sustainability aspect. And then for the designers, just making these changes and iterating and showcasing 3D boards, it's such a value add. It makes us so much faster, so much more creative, and really gives us a whole plethora of options. And we're not limited to just what we can physically order or what you can find online or what idea you had in advance. And so really creativity, we believe, is an unlock in this industry, through the use of virtual sampling and V samples.
We'll also give firms the ability to take back space in their offices because firms, the square footage that they, give to sampling is kind of insane. So I'm sure that's a huge benefit.
You have to file things in an extremely linear way, which I think goes against our creative process. You have to decide, am I filing this by brand, alphabetically by brand, or am I filing this by material type? And then, where does a granite fall in? Does it fall into the category of the composite stones or the natural stones? And then once you have organized those in one linear way that you've decided, you then have to do it by color maybe, or by brand. And so you're constantly sort of limiting the way that you find things. And I don't think designers even reach for the top shelf. They'll always just reach for things that are in arm's reach because of the friction of having to look through this library. And of course, once it's digital, it's just decide I want a geometric texture and I think it should be green. And suddenly you're being shown all of that in all different categories. And if you hit brass as a theme, and now you're seeing brass texture, brass wallpapers, and brass handles. So it's a completely different way of thinking and designing. Yeah, we've had one designer who wanted to put up tens of thousands of materials. They just wanted to digitize their entire library and put it into Mattoboard, which we can do, but it's a little bit more hand-holding at this stage.
Well, soon they'll just have their librarian going through and digitizing everything in the library and then having all the reps come pick everything up.
Yes, that'd be great.
That does bring a question to my mind because I know from my past in design and dealing with sampling in libraries, and there's a lot of times there's discontinued samples. How does Mattoboard address any discontinued samples?
So that will be for the brands. The brands will be able to manage their product inventory in a very smart way in the back end. So they can actually hide or remove products just through the back end, depending on their availability.
Okay, that's easy.
Yeah.
That's nice. Then the librarian, who is usually responsible for that, doesn't have to be responsible for that anymore. So that's nice.
Exactly.
Well, I'm curious to know, who is Mattoboard best for? A residential designer, commercial designer, any designer? Who are you finding it kind of resonates with the most?
Right now, we're finding that it's resonating pretty much with an exact picture of the industry. We're seeing the majority is residential, but we have a huge component which is commercial. And then we have people who are stage and set designers. We have people who are just putting together conceptual boards for other firms and other projects. And we have even hospitality as well. So it's sort of a snapshot, and some students too. It's quite liberating for students. And so in terms of professional glance, it's pretty much representation of the industry. And I think that's because where maybe a commercial designer doesn't find exactly what they're looking for on Matterboard, the speed and ease of creating a very beautiful looking 3D board is so easy on Matterboard that they're just finding some imagery that they like or materials and uploading those and creating their own assets.
Okay, so sort of like a jumping off point for them almost, like
Yeah.
here's the concept.
I think they're also using it as a store of sample libraries, of sample boards. So instead of you trying to find a way to archive board that you've made, of course, with Matterboard, you're just saving projects depending on the different houses that you've got or different projects. And so you've got a series of boards you can always come back to. It's almost like an archive of your projects, and you can share those amongst your team too. So I think people are replicating materials that they have in their own library, even if we don't have them yet. So professionally, it's really a spread of interior designers and decorators and architects.
So I didn't think about the aspect of a team being able to collaborate on a board together, but it sounds like that's possible.
Not yet. So, but designers are finding ways around it. So you can share the 3D scene of Matterboard. And in that process, you share a board, and then someone can then edit that board, make some changes and share it back with you. And then you can open that board, make some changes if you need to. So that's how we're finding designers are working together, which is totally acceptable for us because we're still building the collaboration component. And that should be within the next couple of months that we'll be able to launch teams where designers can actually, really for the first time ever, work remotely and collaboratively on sample boards and mood boards, which will be super exciting. But that's in the pipeline.
That's really exciting. I'm sure that that designers will love that aspect. What do you see as sort of coming up for Matterboard? What's in the future? You mentioned a little bit about partnering with, other companies, sampling companies. Is there anything else that's sort of the future on your mind in the future?
I think if we talk a little bit about what's happening on the periphery of the design industry from a software perspective. And I'm sure everybody listening has probably heard of generative AI and the ability to sort of create images from nothing. So there's a lot of that's happening. What's happening that's less mainstream is the ability to create 3D assets, 3D products very, very quickly and very easily. And where Matterboard sees the future going is that these two trends and these two sort of new freedoms in technology for creative people are going to coincide. Our ability to create 3D assets being like V samples very quickly, and a future of generative imagery. These two things will come together. And it's actually extremely exciting for interior designers. I just think there's no better time to be an interior designer with this happening around us. Because our goal at Matterboard is to really digitize the entire industry. This is to bring all your products and all your samples online, as well as your ability to bring in accessories, so candles, whatever else you need, artwork, and your furniture into a three-dimensional environment. And our big mission here is to be able to get the designer from a blank canvas to their vision of what they want very quickly. And one of the main things that stands in that way is their ability to put together a mood board and a sample board, which is sort of more advanced mood board as a stepping stone towards creating their vision. We're really focused on digitizing the entire industry to create virtual sampling. And we believe that is going to unlock our ability to produce visions for designers in an extremely compelling way that will tie you back to actual physical sample boards. So you'll have this vision, and it'll be associated to a very particular sample board. And you'll be able to change things in that sample board and change your vision, and vice versa. That's sort of where we see this world heading. But it starts with us capturing and creating this new category of virtual sampling.
Are you talking about them using prompts to create a vision of what they want, maybe of a space, and then just as easily creating a board without actually having to pull each individual sample in? Am I understanding that?
I mean, I'm just giving you a glimpse of where we see the future going. And we believe we'll be the central source for all of that. And we also believe that this vision of the future is only possible if Matterboard succeeds at creating virtual sampling. And it's sort of the building blocks of this future. You have to have all these assets online. You have to have the designers designing online for this future to actually happen and for these two things, these two technologies to coincide. But yeah, you frame it very well. We're hoping that we don't want designers to be prompt engineers. We don't want designers to have to be limited by their words. They design with texture and visuals and objects, and they think spatially and they think creatively. And that also happens in this process of creating mood boards and sample boards. And we believe that will be the prompt to generate your ideas. And then from your ideas, you can also then regenerate what the board is and what the materials are.
That sounds amazing. I think I agree with you. I think that AI and just everything that's happening is going to be really fascinating for the design industry and a good thing.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I genuinely believe, being from the industry, we've not had tools that really propelled us forward in terms of our creative potential as designers. We've really been limited. The rest of the design industry seems to get it and not us. And that's part of our drive behind Matterboard, is really to bring the most sophisticated, like superpowers to a touch and feel industry, which has always been limited by physical things. And hopefully we can digitize that process. So I would definitely encourage anyone who wants to be part of that journey to take on a Matterboard Pro account if they're up for it, because that does put you into this Slack channel with us, and we can start sort of to influence the future.
If someone out there is listening and they want to get involved, sign up for an account, how do they do that? How would you recommend they get started?
Just go to www.matterboard.com. Everything is pretty straightforward from there. You can click a button called Start Designing. Can use Matterboard immediately. And if you like what you see, you can definitely upgrade to the Pro.
And is there anything else that you want to share or let people know about?
No, that's probably about it. I think there's very exciting things to come. We're just excited to engage with a lot more designers. Matterboard's grown very quickly, and we've felt so much support from designers who are using Matterboard, and we talk with our community regularly. So we're open to hearing people's ideas and for them to engage with us. And we're just very excited to serve the A&D industry and provide, really the right tools, the right superpowers for them.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sounds like you guys are headed in the right direction. Other than signing up for an account, if someone wants to follow what you all are doing on socials, where can they find you?
So they can find us on @Matterboard on, I think those are for all our social channels, or they can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Well, this has been really, really interesting, Guy. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that everyone listening goes immediately and signs up for an account.
Thanks, Scottie. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.